2 presentations. You'll ask questions and be involved. Thank you very much, ladies. Whenever you're ready.
Hi, my name is Hanna, and this is my dear friend Tachi, and today we're going to be exploring the following TOK knowledge question. To what extent should authorities be able to regulate the knowledge accessible to the general public? So before we enter the realm of TOK, we want to define some of the main terms within the question itself. The first one is knowledge, and we found the following 2 definitions that kind of fit our context of how we want to define it. The first one is knowledge is the sum of what is known, and knowledge is the awareness or familiarity gained by experience of a fact or situation. So in essence, knowledge is what people know as a fact of what is, as a result of what is known collectively, as learned by a fact or situation that they were primarily exposed to.
Another term that we found that was important to define was authority. And as defined by the Oxford Dictionary, authority is the power to, or right to give orders, make decisions, and enforce obedience. Another definition was a person or organization having political or administrative power and control.
All right, so the last term was regulation, which is closely tied to censorship. So the definition we chose for this was the suppression or prohibition of any parts of books, films, news, etc. that are considered obscene, politically unacceptable, or a threat to security.
All right, so to describe a real-life situation, we have to look back into a documentary that came out from BBC. And basically, India's Daughter is a movie directed by Leslie Udwin, and it was a documentary about the gang rape of a 23-year-old medical student. Her name was Yati Singh, and she was gang raped and fatally injured in New Delhi on December 16th, 2012. The film shows the sequence of events of her rape and the conviction of the man who raped her, as well as interviews with the men who were convicted of killing her, their lawyers, and her relatives. And more importantly, I think it specifically examined the cultural values of the Indian society. However, days after the movie was released, the Indian government took several measures to ban the screening of the movie, and for several reasons. The Ministry of Information and Broadcasting argued that the movie would promote violence against women. The Minister of Parliamentary Affairs stated that the movie was, quote, an international conspiracy to defame India, unquote. And an Indian lawyer and activist said that it would create public space for the convicts and that they may be seen as role models by other men. We chose this topic because after watching the movie, both of us were truly touched by it. And as feminists, as women, and as human beings, we believe that the atrocious acts of the men are completely inhumane and a problem that must be dealt with. More importantly, we were curious as to why the banning of the movie was even an option for the Indian government, as it eloquently discussed the issues at hand.
So before we identify our argument, we also need to establish the assumptions that we're making in the process. The first one is that India's Daughter is a medium for the dissemination of knowledge. In other words, the documentary is a way for people to know certain things about their environment. The authority that we're referring to is the Indian government and the police forces, and the regulation is the banning itself of the movie. We also are assuming that there exists a moral absolute regarding first-degree murder and rape. In other words, we believe that murder and rape are never justifiable. Moral absolutism is the ethical belief that there are absolute standards against which moral questions can be judged, and that certain actions are right or wrong regardless of the context of the act. And we'll touch on this idea later on in the presentation. But because of this, we believe that there's a need for development in India. A fact that supports this idea is that there's one rape every 20 minutes there. Also, the last assumption that we're making is that in order for progression to occur, there's a need for awareness and compassion, which are started by initiated conversation.
Right, so the first TOK lens that we want to look at this event with is emotion. After watching the movie, both Hanna and I agree that the documentary incites a strong emotional response from the audience. From fear to anger, disgust, sadness, guilt, and embarrassment. The types of emotional responses that watchers were exposed to are both primary and secondary, or survival and social emotions. Evidence of such response, not only by us. We're seeing here on the side, you have some tweets of people, what people thought after they watched the movie. And just to quote, various articles were written, and one of them was by a victim of sexual assault. And she wrote that, quote, "I tried to watch the BBC documentary India's Daughter on Sunday, but I switched it off after 25 minutes. I found it too painful to watch and too familiar." This shows how this issue is a very sensitive topic that touches the life of many, especially in India. So looking at this quote by, and I'm going to ask Hanna to say this name.
George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel.
Thank you. Who is a German philosopher and during the post-Kant era. It basically states that without the emotional response and compassion, people are unable to advance. And therefore we were able to determine that the banning of the movie would not lead to any progress. As the movie incites such a strong emotional response, as I previously disclosed, according to this quote, the banning of the movie will not allow the Indian public to develop this key empathy and strong sense of a need to make a change. However, an implication of this would be that it is important to understand that people can also be too affected by their emotions, and their perception of the world can skew dramatically based on those. Looking at the theory of self-interest, we also wanted to highlight the fact that the Indian government was claiming that this was an international conspiracy to defame India. The theory of self-interest by Thomas Hobbes basically states that humans are only concerned with their own self. And because the Minister of Parliamentary Affairs stated that this documentary was just used to shed a negative light on India, it could likely, because the documentary incites shame and embarrassment to its government, it shows that the Indian government is more concerned about their own image and than one of the nation's largest problems. If this was the main reason for the banning of the movie, we believe that it's not justifiable. An implication of this would be that the banning of the movie would impede development, as the government isn't willing to accept one of its main problems, especially if they can be hidden on a larger scale, as long as their own image is preserved. Lastly, as a counter-argument, we felt like desensitization could be caused by the movie. Basically, as the previously stated, an Indian lawyer, her name was Indira Jai Singh, claimed that men could be led to see the convict as role models and thus reciprocate their actions. We can infer that the exposure to the explicit emotional content of the movie could lead to desensitization, which is basically the diminished emotional responsiveness to a negative stimulus after repeated exposure to it. The movie itself had exposed explicit details of Yoti's death. Some of the language used, for example, was extremely strong. And here's some of the key statements that were repeatedly used by the filmmakers. Men took turns raping her. They thrust an iron rod into her and ripped out her intestines and threw her as a carcass at the side of the road. The exposure to this details could lead to the diminishing of people's emotional responsiveness to such atrocious acts. More importantly, we have to highlight the fact that the superiority of men is a familiar ideal in Indian society, in the Indian culture, and such desensitization can cause men to see rape and murder as normalcy, and possibly even as a necessary assertion of power. Especially since the convicts in the movie did not even seem regretful for what they had done. They even said that it was Yoti's own fault that she was murdered. An implication of this is that by limiting the amount of emotional content in movies, it would prohibit the spreading of knowledge and awareness, as we can see through this quote.